go over to the Department of Education. Linda McMahon had an interview on CNN. The one thing that you cannot say about conservatives or anybody that is a part of the Trump organization is that they don't absolutely positively make sure that they make themselves available for anybody that may have something to say against them. This is Linda and her speaking about what happens next with eliminating the Department of Education. Check it out.
Another hectic week in Donald Trump's America, and the president watched the NCAA wrestling match last night. But front and center back here in Washington is the education of America's children. After President Trump made good on a longtime conservative talking point and took major steps to shutter his own Department of Education. The president said some of the duties of the Education Department, like distributing funding for students with disabilities and managing student loans, would be handled by different departments. But there are urgent questions about how those changes would happen, how they would affect students who need the help, how any of it will help turn around learning for American kids. Well, here with me exclusively is the woman winding down her own department, Education Secretary Linda McMahon. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. There's so many concerns and questions from parents about the real consequences of all of this. So let's talk about it. Hopefully we'll get some answers today. The president's executive order said that the Department of Education should begin to shutter. You well know, and you said this under oath, you can't do that without Congress changing the law. It doesn't seem like right now there are the votes to do that. So if you can't close it down, what exactly will the Education Department be doing now?
Well, I think, first of all, thanks, Dana, for having me this morning. It's nice to start a Sunday with you.
Thank you.
I think the president was very clear. The outward-facing programs that are going to be affecting students there's not going to be any defunding for those programs. When he talked about student loans, that would be going to the Small Business Administration, and also then the programs for students with disabilities will more than likely rest in HHS, which, by the way, is where they began. I think we're looking at putting things in different departments where they can operate very efficiently as we look at how we can shut down the Department of Education.
Do they not operate efficiently now?
Not as well as they should be. As a matter of fact, the president campaigned on the fact that he wanted to close down the Department of Education. And what we saw with our scores recently with the NAEP, which is our country's report card, I mean, it's unacceptable where education is in our country today. And so the Department of Education does not educate one child. It does not establish any curriculum in any states. It doesn't hire teachers. It doesn't establish programs. Mm-hmm. What it is more of a pass-through of funding, which is appropriated by Congress, by the way. And so we want to make sure that funding continues in the departments where it needs to be, but at the same time, give states the opportunities to be innovative and creative with their teaching.
So you mentioned that there are lots of data. There's lots of data that shows that, I think, to put it mildly, education could be better in America.
Absolutely.
But you also just admitted, and it's just fact, that most of the funding, most of all of the curriculum, and everything that goes into educating our students happens on a local level. So I'm not quite sure how eliminating the Department of Education is going to make those test scores go up.
Well, a lot of the funding that goes into states now goes with a lot of red tape, a lot of strings attached to it. And so governors and state superintendents of education have said, look, if we have the funding coming in which allows us to be more creative, how can we spend that? The president believes, as I do, that the best education is that's closest to the students. And I want to look at some of the states that have been incredibly great over the last couple of years, like Louisiana. Their NAEP score showed that they had improved the most of any states. Those were programs that were put in place by the governors, by the superintendent of education, not having anything to do with the Department of Education in Washington. So what we need to do is to make sure that the funding has a clear path, the funding continues, but that the states are allowed to spend the money where they need to spend it, to hire teachers, increase their salaries, make sure that our students with special needs are taken care of. And that's what we want to make sure that happens.
I just want to ask a sort of a fundamental philosophical question, and that is, do you believe that the federal government has a responsibility to ensure that all children, rural children, urban, rich, poor, special needs, have access to quality education?
That is certainly the goal of the president. He has said that he wants to make sure that there is equal access to quality education for every student in our country, which is why he is such a proponent of school choice. He doesn't believe that any child should be trapped in a failing school, that we should have parents have the ability to choose where their children can be able to go to school so that if they are in a failing school, they have an opportunity to have better education somewhere else, that they have the tools to be able to do that.
But if I may, it's a goal of the president, but is it a federal responsibility to ensure that every child in America has access to a good education?
I think that was the purpose of public education when we first began it in our country. And I think that the federal government, state governments, we owe it to all of our children. After all, that's the next generation of our engineers, our scientists, our quantum mathematicians, but also our welders, our plumbers, our HVACs, our welders, all of that. We have to make sure that there's educational opportunity available to every single student so they can be the best they can be. That's how we compete in the world.
You mentioned.
So basically, what she's saying, to make a long story short, basically what she's saying is that we need to spend more time and more resources, not on the BS, not on all of the extras that come along with it, not on all of the indoctrination policies, not making our schools indoctrination camps, but we need to make sure that the funding is going where it's supposed to go, and also ensure that the states are held responsible, and they are the ones that are stewards over the money that's being distributed to our education system on an individual level. She says, well, can we ensure that everybody is getting a quality education? All right, well, we have to answer that question with a question. And I never like to answer a question with a question, but I absolutely want to answer a question with a question in this instance because I think that it's necessary. How many people in the chat right now, respectfully, regardless of what side of the aisle that you're on, because I know that we got some dusty people here that just want to chat and just say anything. How many people believe that the public school as we know it today, up to the point that Trump got elected into office, how many people believe that our education system, our public school education system, that has largely been covered over the Department of Education on the federal level, has been doing an adequate job on educating our students, especially as compared to people that are receiving educations outside of the United States of America? Just me and Tasha, I'm asking the same question. Is every student, because if you're complaining about something that's working, that's one thing. If you're complaining about something that hasn't been working and has been broken, and what Linda McMahon has basically said is that we just been pushing kids through. That's all we've been doing. We've been pushing kids through. The Room 9 kids is coming through with the same regular kids, and the kids that are actually, you know what it reminds me of? I always like to use movie and movie relationship and music references. It reminds me of the movie Class Act. If y'all have never seen Class Act before, it is hilarious. I love that movie. It was with Kid and Play. All right. You have Blade Brown and Duncan Penderhughes got switched up, and somehow they jumped in the air because they ran into the black lady's booty, and they transcripts got switched around, and so they mistakenly both had got into each other's classes. By the end of the movie, what they realized was that Blade Brown, which was the dark-skinned one, actually wasn't a thug, and he wasn't stupid. He just wasn't applying himself, and the education system was failing us because our culture, the culture by which he subjected himself to, was wrong. It was so many psychological lessons that came along with watching that movie. It was so many lessons that came along with that movie. The dude, Duncan Penderhughes, he was not supposed to be in this other class, but he was able to adjust and adapt. But at the same time, it was very, very toxic for him. And he had to call Blade Brown in order to become a cultural norm and had to dumb himself down in order to be accepted. And then ultimately, they had to discover that he was actually one of the good guys. Blade Brown wasn't an idiot. He just didn't apply himself, and his cultural norms prevented him from actually doing the thing that he was supposed to do because all they seen him as is a thug. It's the exact same thing as our education system, except for they just push him through. They just push him through. Don't matter if you pass, don't matter if you, hey, no child is left behind. Push him through. Push him through. Push him through. I used to see kids back when I was coming up either get double promoted, and sometimes kids had to get held back. Double promoted and held back. Now everybody can come through. Everybody wins.
Students with disabilities. Of course, currently your department enforces the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which does guarantee, it's a federal guarantee for free public education for children with disabilities. Can you guarantee to those parents and those students that there won't be any disruption with their education and the guarantees for their education?
I certainly hope. I would like to see even more funding go to the states for that. And if it rests with HHS, which is one of the suggestions, that funding clearly is going to continue to come from Congress. And we want to make sure that those students do have those special services and those needs which they have, which is really monitored and taken care of at the state level.
So it's funding, but I'm not hearing so far any federal promise from you, who is still in charge of federal education policy and the laws passed by Congress that you are still in charge of to protect children who need it, that those protections are still going to be there and that they won't be disrupted.
They're not going to be disrupted, and it really does rest from the federal level on the funding. So the funding is appropriated by Congress. It flows through to the states. But am I, the Secretary of Education sitting in Washington, going to have a view into a schoolroom where a teacher is trying to take care of a student with special needs?
Nope.
Or is that going to happen better at the local level where that teacher, in cooperation with the parents and the local school officials, has more opportunity to make sure that that student's needs are taken care of? That's where it needs to lie.
So basically what they're saying is the same thing that we were saying, but obviously a much different issue when it came to your body, your choice. We need to let that be handled on the local level. Why? Because on the local level, you know better about what it is that needs to be funded, and you know better about what needs to happen inside of those classrooms. The funding doesn't change. The bureaucratic tape, the federal oversight, all of these extra things that came along with the funding, all of these extra people that are making money and that is stealing from the system, we're removing that, and we're still going to have funding for education. It still gets distributed, but it is now handled on a state's level, and we don't need the federal government to be playing a much larger role in what happens on a school level, the same way that you don't need the federal government playing a huge role in 2025 on what the states determine and the people that vote in those states on whether or not you can use a deletion of your babies as a form of contraception. We don't need all of these different layers of government. You know what happens when you have too many layers of middle management inside of a company? The company dies. It's slow to innovate. It doesn't know what goes on the ground. It has no clue of what the customers want. You are basically allowing for the states to take back control of what happens to their students when it comes to education and be held accountable as a result of it. We don't need the Department of Education continuing to oversee what's happening.
If they don't have the funding, if they don't have the support from Congress to continue to appropriate that money, then that's where the students can really, fall through the cracks.
Okay, so let's talk about funding. Let's focus on funding. There are a lot.
Dana ain't got nothing for this lady. Dana ain't got nothing for this lady.
Republicans, including many state officials, education officials in particular, who want you to change Title I grants for students in low-income or low-performing areas into what's known as block grants, which is just a lump sum of money with no strings attached. Now, there are some advocates, some experts who think that no strings attached concept will mean that the money won't get to those who need it. it could end up with also larger class sizes, fewer after-school programs, fewer
You
resources.
talking about how they had larger class sizes as a result of allocating monies for the immigration, illegal immigration that's tied to the United States of America?
How do you do a block? And first of all, I guess the question is, do you want to do that block grant?
That's one of the suggestions. And as I've talked to governors around the country, many governors, Governor Youngkin in Virginia, who said, clearly, I think that we have eyes on the education in our states. And if we have the funding, that we know how to spend it, where to spend it, without the government trying to say from their bureaucratic perch in Washington, this is where you should be spending that money. And Governor Youngkin or other governors could say, no, but if I take that money and I spend it in this district, or I spend it over here for teacher salaries, or I spend it here, I'm going to raise the level of education in my state. I'm the one with the bird's eye view, and I'm the one with the accountability.
I like that.
How do you,
I like that.
on the one hand, say
Listen,
that
if you guys don't like where the money is being allocated inside of your state to what, whether it's teacher salaries, whether it's to the schools, whether they allow for you to do school of choice, whether you go to a voucher program, if more money need to be distributed as far as people that are homeschooling, that is on the individual state's desk now. That is not a federal mandate. They distribute the money. The states are now responsible on an individual level. The legislators inside of the states, the governors, the teachers, all of you guys will now have to have a greater sense of responsibility and a larger role in educating your children. Who would not want this? Who would not want this? And it speaks to what I've been telling you guys for years and years and years, ever since we started this platform, is that you have to get involved on a local level. Individually, what happens to you on a daily basis, it is much more impactful for you to get involved on the local level than for you to get involved on the national level. The national level is cool. The local level is a requirement. People that come to me and say, hey, my vote don't matter, I ask them, well, who is your city council member and what district are they over inside of you? Who's your alderman? How do you know what education the children are getting? What is the millages that's going on inside of your state? Did you vote on which millage, and what did the millage say? Did you read it before you went to the polls? Why wouldn't we allow for the states to determine where the funding is going and just giving it to them? And Linda McMahon didn't even say that this is what they were doing definitively. She said, I'm having conversations with the different governors in these states to determine exactly how we need to do it. Should we do it as a block, or should we do it individually?
Is still in the business of, which is still the law, protecting those students with disabilities, for example, and then send money without any guarantee that that's where the federal taxpayer dollars will go.
Oh, well, let's be sure that we're understanding when you're talking about Title I versus IDEA money, which is the money that is being passed by Congress for students with disabilities, that will go for that purpose.
So that won't be block granted.
That's not going to be block granted in with Title I money. No, that's separate money that would go, because they would clearly have that responsibility to make sure that money does get to those students.
I mean, that's an important distinction.
Oh, it's a very important
I don't think that was clear to people.
That's a very important distinction.
Just on the idea of...
She over there killing Dana Bash. Dana Bash can't even say nothing negative because Dana Bash is usually combative. She listening, she let her finish her whole question, and then she answer her, and she correct her and give her some insight. Oh, I didn't know. Now you know.
Of Congress, you mentioned this, that the president wants to move the student loan program to the Small Business Administration, which you were in charge of in the last Trump term, and then move others to HHS. Why do you think President Trump has the legal authority to do that when these programs are inside your department through a law of Congress?
Well, certainly President Trump has said he will move things in accordance with the law and in cooperation with Congress. He certainly knows that if there are statutes or laws that are governing where they need to be, we'll have to abide by the law.
Nice. I like Linda McMahon. I think that she's doing an excellent job in communicating exactly what the Trump mandates are. And I think that it's going well. I think that she's absolutely positively given a master class on listen and respond, or I'm sorry, listen and understand and then responding instead of listening to respond.